Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are speaking with yet another creator from the High Republic. We are so excited to be joined by the wonderful and talented Daniel José Older on the show today, who is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Race to Crashpoint Tower. So very exciting, Sarah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You might also know him from so many other incredible things he has done within the Star Wars universe, including the Star Wars High Republic Adventures comics, Last Shot, and short stories in both From a Certain Point of View and Certain Point of View, Empire Strikes Back.
So yeah, we are just so excited to share this interview with everybody. And without further ado, let's turn it over to our conversation with author Daniel José Older.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
All right, we are so excited to have author Daniel José Older on the podcast today. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I enjoy your show. And yeah, it's great to talk.
Awesome. So firstly, we have to congratulate you on the recent release of Race to Crashpoint Tower. It is a book that we both adored. And so first question, kind of coming off of that, is what's it like for this novel alongside all of the, High Republic releases thus far to be New York Times bestsellers?
Yes. It's awesome, first of all. Simplest answer is it's really awesome. It's really like a great marker, I think, of just how excited people are about what we're doing. And not only the fact that they've been on there, but that they really like steadily, like each release lands, and so we all, I think, celebrate just about equally, like the fact that whenever one of them hits, it's just this huge explosion in the Slack and on email and everything else. It's so gratifying and amazing. I mean, the New York Times list is complicated, right? Because it's one measure of things, and the numbers are very complex and don't always make sense, and who knows? But one thing it does definitely display is that a lot of people are buying the book, no question, and that's amazing. I just honestly, it's truly the response, the overall fan response, like New York Times aside, the reaction on social media and from people just across the board has been so incredibly, not just like positive, but just like it's the depth with which, that's one of the reasons I loved your guys' conversation about the book, was just the depth that people bring to the conversation across the board on High Republic. It's so gratifying. Like, we bring so much to it as writers. And so having, readers take so much from it and bring so much of their thoughts and ideas and inspirations and analysis to it. Like, that's the dream, like coupled with great sales, that's the dream. And so it's really, really cool. Way exceeded. I didn't really have like a set marker in my head of like what we would do or not do. I just pretty much went into it like, well, I hope people enjoy this because I am, and they are. And that's so great.
What's been amazing is the High Republic in Wave 1. It was just such a big deal. And I was like, I wonder if it can get even bigger. And I really feel that wave of energy for Wave 2. It just feels like it's grown so exponentially. Just, again, the conversation, all the new characters between all three of your books, this wave, and the comics continuing to expand that galaxy. But I want to know for you, with this being your first book in the High Republic outside of the comic series, and I believe your first middle grade Star Wars novel as well, if I'm correct.
That's right.
What's it like to writing something for a younger audience? And like for you, what are some of the most important things that you want to connect with younger readers and even like older readers who might attach themselves to the story like we did?
Sure. Right. Yeah, definitely. In some ways, it's like the work is cut out for me because Star Wars is, has so much great middle grade content, like, including the original trilogy. In some ways is very middle grade, like in certain ways, right? In other ways, it's not. But there's definitely aspects of it that really ring true on a middle grade template. And so some of it is just kind of grabbing from that. I mean, Rebels, it's another really great example. Like, yeah, technically the characters are a little older than your traditional middle grade novel, but a lot of the themes that come up and a lot of the mix, the overall mix that we all love about Star Wars of like really exciting, sometimes dark and scary and very edgy, and also like deep and about something, that really is meaningful in this world too. that's also kind of my sweet spot for whether I'm writing Star Wars or not. That's basically the vibe that I kind of go with. And so that's because I'm a Star Wars kid, So when I'm writing for kids, I'm thinking about, 8-year-old me and 10-year-old me and like, what did I love and what did I want more of and all of that. So it's that. For me, I think the main thing about a book for young people is that it centers young people and that young people are the ones like driving the action. And even if we dip in and out of older characters' heads now and then, for the most part, it's really about young people. That's true on Adventures. That's true in Race to Crashpoint Tower. And I think secondary to that, or alongside that, is that we're dealing with some tough things throughout, tough issues and elements and themes, because it is a tough world that we are living in, no matter who you are. And it worked out by happenstance. This wasn't obviously planned. We didn't know there was a pandemic coming when we were playing in the High Republic. But as it happens, we are now living in a world that is very much resonant to what's happening in the High Republic, which is that young people are realizing that the galaxy is not safe at all. And while it was when they were born and up for a lot of their lives, very much, like the opposite is happening and they're in danger, especially if they're Padawans. So, that's what we're talking about. And that's what's happening in the world. And the idea being that hopefully kids will read it and develop a language around understanding a changing world around them and what it means to be in danger, what it means to take responsibility for things and step up into your power and, honor your own power and have difficult conversations about fear, about death, about all these things that are realities for people in much more across the board ways than they have been in any of our lifetimes. So it's all of that. And then finally, I would say, like, I do write with adults secondary, but still in mind. I do want adults to be able to read and enjoy these stories. But if it comes to a crossroads where I have to make a choice, kid or adult, I'm obviously going to go kid. And that's pretty much that's where the priorities are. Mm-hmm. But I write for my 10-year-old self, and I also write for my 41-year-old self. And hopefully we can all be happy.
No, I definitely see that, because if you look at The Rising Storm, it's a lot darker, a lot more grim. So we recommended to readers, read Race to Crashpoint Tower second, because, after you're kind of kicked while you're down, you take it all the way back up. But I love your comment about how it's sort of a giving off this message that the world isn't safe. And sometimes you got to be wary of what your surroundings look like. And for Ram and Lula, that's sort of where they end up at the end of the stories. Even though the world is unsafe and chaotic, there's still a place within that world that they can exist and also fight for the good, right. And that's been the most uplifting part of this book for Sarah and I, is just that story of growth and moving beyond your kind of ordinary world of a hero.
Right. Totally. Yeah. That's what I went into it with, hoping that people would take away, and the idea that there's healing in action. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lesson I really learned being a paramedic, which I did for 10 years and really taught me, there's skills that you learn as a paramedic and there's life lessons that you take as a paramedic. But the thing that you can't find in a textbook or a philosophy book that you have to do to really learn is that by taking action, you also cleanse yourself of the trauma of the moment. And, on a very micro level, that is true. And people would always be like, how do you sleep at night with all the stuff that you see? And it's like, well, I sleep great. Because we're out there, not just seeing stuff, we're out there actually actively participating and trying to bring people back. That doesn't make us better than anybody else. That's our job. And we would do it the best we could. But in doing it, we would also be healing ourselves as much as we were doing our best to heal the other people. And it doesn't always work out, right? Sometimes patients die, and sometimes things go for the worse in the galaxy far, far away. And sometimes, we live in pandemics. And so what do you do with that? You do something. And that's what matters. It's not about necessarily success or failure as much as it is that you step forward actively, as a protagonist in your own world, even though it was looking really bleak. And maybe that's why at the end of the day, you're okay. And that you do sleep at night, and that you then become a better Jedi for the next time around, when things are bleak again, and you can fight even better and maybe win this time.
I will say I have a couple connections to that. My brother is a medic, and he's 20. He's a kid. He's doing this, and it's very interesting to kind of hear him talk through what it means to him and how he goes about his day and his job and how he makes a difference. And I really see that taking action, not only in his life, but also I'm connecting the points all over here, but like in these books. And for me as an adult reader, I've loved the stories of all the High Republic books so much, but I've gotten the most out of some of the conversations, the small moments in the middle grade books. You know, A Test of Courage deals a lot with grief. And that's definitely a feeling I felt throughout a lot of the past year. And in this book with Lula and Zine, we talk a lot about balance. And these are conversations that are so important to have at any age. So I think we're going to talk a little bit more about Lula and Zine Lula and Zine and Vern kind of a little bit later. But kind of circling it back to writing for your 10-year-old self and you as a Star Wars kid. I would love to know a little bit more about your journey with Star Wars and how you connected to Star Wars as a kid and what brought you to Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean, it was really my first like entertainment love or story love. You know, like I literally saw Return of the Jedi when I was 3 years old. It was the first movie I went to in a movie theater and absolutely changed my life. I was terrified of the Rancor. I ran out of the theater screaming. I was 3, you know, and then I went back in and I kept going back and back and back. But the other thing I remember really loving actually was the behind the scenes special that they did that was on TV from time to time. And I think we tried to like VHS tape it, you know.
Days.
You
couldn't miss it.
Right. Yeah. You had to be there, right? Like you had to be there. But yeah, I remember that really, as much as the movie itself, I just loved like the creature shop. I really wanted to design creatures. And also in retrospect, I've more recently kind of come around to realize that I've always loved gangster stories too, and that whole opening sequence of Jabba's palace has always been kind of my foundation as a Star Wars fan and writer. But I also love like The Godfather and in particular, and just on Narcos, another Star Wars connection. But yeah, like I also grew up in a town that was like absolutely the bank robber capital of the Northeast, if not the world, at the time, Charlestown, which is part of Boston and which is 100% bank robbers. Like, and I didn't think about it growing up. Like literally, if there was a bank robbery anywhere in the Northeast, cops would just wait at the bridge that went past my house, and the robbers would come back to Charlestown.
Wow,
like, that's how entrenched it is. The movie The Town with Ben Affleck is about my home. Yeah, wow. And the show recently on Showtime, what's it called? City on a Hill. Which is a fantastic show. Totally about Charlestown, or partially about Charlestown. But anyway, like I never put it all together until more recently. They're like, wow, I really grew up in the heart of all that. And I love gangster stories. I also love, Star Wars and Jabba's palace, and like it all just comes together. So it all tracks somehow in my weird brain, and it just makes sense. But I've just always loved Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to think growing up loving Star Wars and to now be helping to pave the way for this next generation of storytelling. And I can't even imagine the sense of not only like responsibility, but just like pride in that, and like being able to be the next voice for that next generation. And I think that's something so special with Race to Crashpoint Tower is just, it really is like a hero's journey. And like you connect a lot of what seems to be you love with Star Wars as creatures, right? You get the bomb bracks, you get some droids, you kind of get a lot of layers to this book. And what did the collaborative process for this book look like? Knowing Wave 2 is going to be much darker than Wave 1, but how do you still maintain that spark of hope throughout it?
Yeah, a lot of that had to do with, it's kind of like the editing question, right? Like when do you begin and when do you end, right? Like, so, we begin in peacetime in a sense, essentially, even though we're already well into the initiative at this point, and the Nile have made themselves clear and they've caused quite a few deaths, but they're a little bit receded at this moment, and people are sort of in a false sense of lulled into a false sense of safety, which not for nothing is kind of what happened with the pandemic, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So here we are. Ram is like, I'm just living my little quiet life. I really needed to land it in a moment where everything hadn't necessarily been resolved in the galaxy, because it's not, and it's not going to be for a while. But even in the Republic Fair itself, the real arc of both Lula and Ram is learning to stand up and fight and do what has to be done, So wherever that arc gets us in story world is where we're going to land. So it wasn't so much about like making it all the way to the end of the Republic Fair, because that, in a sense, that would have been a lie. Like it would have been to sort of say like, okay, well, we fixed that, so everything's okay, and it's not okay. You know, it's almost like, I think in terms of music a lot, when you land on a song, you know, you can land back on the 1, or you can land on the 5, which is a much more discordant and dissonant kind of vibe, and it makes it feel like there's more to come, and there is, right? But you want a satisfying ending too, and so there's all these sort of layers that you're kind of throwing at the page and at the story and at the arc of it. But at the end of the day, like, to my mind, like the reason that the story feels done is because it's done for their internal arc. The adventure continues. Like, it's not about the full like completion of like the saga, right? It's really about like these young people realizing that they have it within themselves to do something to help. And that's what that means, right? So that's really where I was going, sort of to our earlier conversation. It's about them coming to that realization that to take action is to win, even if you don't necessarily succeed in the whole plan, right? Just doing that little part changes the world. And it does, which we know from reading Rise and Storm, but also even in that moment of like the comms coming back on, right? Spoiler alert. You know, like you hear the Jedi and you see them like already rallying and how much they're able to accomplish. Why? Because these kids like kept going and decided to stand up and take a stand and not let themselves be held back by the fact that they're young people, and also like tapped into their own skills. Like, you know, for Ram to be like, I really just want to hide in my garage, but I also have this thing within me that can actually do like an incredible amount of good considering the situation we're in. So I have to use it. And he learns.
Definitely. And you brought up the characters from the adventure comic line: Lula, Zine, Court, Farzala, the whole gang, everybody. Right. But mostly Lula and Zine here. So knowing that these characters were going to show up in Race to Crashpoint Tower, what went into writing them for you to make the transition, you know, seamless and allow these characters to grow in a new way in a different format? And what are the challenges and opportunities did this kind of present for these characters?
Sure. I think challenges and opportunities is a great way to think of it, because they're just such different mediums. And in some ways they really allow for certain like elements to come to the foreground, and in other ways they make it much more difficult. And so it's really just about thinking through what those elements are. Like, what am I going to have to do just on a very practical, like Capricorn level? Like, what can I get away with? Like, how much room do I have on a page? How many pages do I have? In a novel, you have a whole lot more room, especially for internal thought, right? For like a character to really be like going deep inside themselves to figure out like, what am I going to do next? Or what am I going through right now emotionally? You can do it in a comic. You just have less real estate to do it in. And a comic is really about there's so much more action happening on the page, right? So it's not necessarily means like that obviously there's still going to be internal arcs in comics, and there certainly are in High Republic Adventures. But a lot of those arcs, we're seeing them happen like physically, and which is very different than having like a whole page of inner monologue, right, during the course of the action. So those were definitely some of the things I went into. I will say that like I knew basically from the beginning of this, once I knew what I was writing, which is to say, once I knew I was writing the High Republic Adventures and probably some books here and there, I knew that I wanted to weave a huge story throughout. So that was always built into my head as like, okay, it's going to be, 5 months of adventures. And then it's going to be a novel, and then it's going to be another 6 months of adventures. And now we know then it's going to be another novel. And that is one large story that is incredibly interconnected and touches on itself and then other storytelling and everywhere else. So yeah, to take it's an opportunity, right? Like I really wanted it to be a vibe where we've met these kids now, and now we get to go even deeper and find out what's going on with them, like internally on a whole other level, and spend a whole novel with them and bring in new kids. And now with all that we've gathered, we get to move into basically, the next section of storytelling with that momentum, and then go even deeper. And then when we get to the YA, well, we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, we definitely hope to see more of those characters pop up. And I think you're really the first to make that jump between mediums, which was so exciting, because I just did not expect to see Zine. And we knew Lula because she's on the cover, obviously, but right, Zine and even like Vern and Kantam Sai, so excited to see all of them involved. But now on the flip side, you're bringing characters from the books and back into adventures. So the recent issues, you got to play around with Affy, Leox, and of course the Vintian himself, Geode. So I would love to know, how fun has it been to now be on the other side, bringing characters into a new medium, into comic form, getting to showcase some of their talents, and also growing alongside Court and Farzala at the center of the story.
Yes, I'm having such a good time with that. First of all, with with Claudia's characters, like as soon as I read the book, I was like, oh, these are made for comics. That's a great example, of what you're asking about earlier, is that she works wonders with them on the page. But reading them, I was like immediately thinking like how great they would really, like Geode would be just like appearing next to someone or just, in a cockpit, which is exactly the beat that I managed to get, or talking to Court and no one understanding them but them, and Court having an entire heart to heart, about whatever we don't know. So those moments were immediately clear as soon as I read the book, and I was just really excited. That's one of the coolest parts of this whole initiative, is just being able to read each other's work and all these writers that I respect so much, and being like, oh, I can just grab this character. And I'll literally jump on the Slack and be like, hey, is anybody using Leox in this moment in galactic history? Like, can I borrow him? It's like like having kids and you call like their family and be like, hey, you have like a sleepover party with like the whole crew of the vessel.
Yeah.
Like, do it the vibe. So it's that, and then what's also really fun is like writing a character like Ram, getting to see him in really beautiful art by Peter Antonsen in the book, and then knowing that we get to see him in the next phase of the comics with really cool art by Tony Bruno, who's doing this run of High Republic Adventures coming up starting next month, and Harvey Tolibao, of course, like the main artist for the run. It's just so exciting to like see these characters also like in different artists' hands, and as they grow, and they all grow a lot. That's the other thing I wanted to say, is like these are characters that change a lot. We're talking about more than a year, probably almost 2 years of like story time. I don't know exactly what the amount is. Either way, it doesn't matter. But it's a great period of time, right? Especially for a young person, like that's a tremendous time of growth for these students. And they are really going through, not just going through it, but they're also going through the changes of it. And what does that mean? And that's such a cool opportunity, because there's so much stagnancy sometimes, with characters. Like there's a sense that it's like, well, we have to get to know them and they have to wear the same clothes all the time, so we understand exactly who they are and memorize that. And it's branding. And we can really get trapped in that, right? But like, we've had an opportunity to really like watch them change. And that's real, because kids change, especially like we said. And that's been so gratifying, like the changes, especially the changes that are coming. But also like to your question, like following Farzala and Court and really being able to take time with them and give them attention and like let them be the center of it all and the focus of it is so cool, because like in a book, you can't really do that as much. Like, in a book, you kind of get the 2 POV characters or a couple or 5 or whatever, and that's who you run with, right? But in a comics run, it's like, okay, we start with Lula and Zine, and we bring in Crix a little bit too, and, we follow those different paths for sure. But like Court and Farzala are like C characters at best. And now they're A characters in this section, and that's just very gratifying, because there's a lot going on with them that I'm excited for people to find out about.
I am obsessed with them. I know I just met them like a month ago, but like I would love to be their best friends.
They're really so good kids. They're so cool. They care about each other. What's amazing to me, I posted that Court art last night from one of the alternate covers, the variants, and like the amount of love for Court. Like this is a character who has not had one major plot point for himself. He has not spoken one word of intelligible basic or English in any way. We don't know anything about him except he wears that helmet, and he's a good friend with a good heart, and he's good with a lightsaber. That's it. We don't know anything about him, but people love him. And I know, I love that too. Like that's tribute to also like Harvey's great art, because he brought a lot of heart to how he draws Court. Particularly, one detail about Court that I didn't know, which is that he is constantly playing with something in his hands. That was all Harvey. I didn't write that. Yeah, and I love that. He's like this, a little bit nervous, and he's always like, he's got something in his hands all the time. Harvey brought that. Like, I didn't tell Harvey to do that, but that's the attention to detail and love and character depth that Harvey brings to the page. Like, he is absolutely a genius.
Yeah, I'm so tempted to get just the one page of Geode and Court hugging it out, talking. I just want to get it framed on my wall because it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I love that too.
It's just such a wholesome moment.
Yeah, it is.
All right, I feel like we would totally fail this interview if we did not bring up Buckets of Blood.
Buckets of
Blood and Yoda.
Yes.
Because there are two great things. Of course, Buckets of Blood yelling his own name, iconic. We have to love it. But also Yoda and his baking skills, which has become one of the silliest, like most fun things of this entire era. What's up with that? When are we getting the recipe book? And what brought you to make this particular inclusion with Yoda? Because it's a true delight, and also their friendship and Buckets of Blood also getting in on the baking and him being a healer, everything.
I can tell you that there's something I can't talk about related to this question.
Oh no!
But that's all I can tell you.
All right.
But to the larger question of where it started, it actually really just started as an offhand moment that built into something bigger, as things often do, right? I kind of think of myself as both a gardener and an architect in that framework of like whether or not you really plot out meticulously or whether you just kind of run with it. And there is a lot of very like careful planning and architecture involved, but there's also always room for just growth and seeds that you plant kind of turning into other things. So that really sprung out of the moment of issue 3, where Zine is just sad and struggling and away from home and away from her best friend and everything else. And everyone's trying to comfort her. And Yoda shows up with, baked goods, as one does when someone's sad. And I didn't know if they would let me like squeeze it into canon that he had probably baked them and that Buckets of Blood was like, nom, 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 the whole time. But it's not like those are the details that bring certain places to life, is that like people have different ways of comforting each other. And my personal feeling about the Starlight is that it should feel like the coolest sleepover camp ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not even camp, but just like experience, right? Like it's all your friends. It's all your friends, and it's all these really wild, powerful wizards who are also like really badass and deep and complicated and all this other stuff. That's what it should feel like. And so, yeah, exactly. Like, what more could you want? So, along with that, it's like, well, what are the more like just sort of homey moments that entails besides just the plot points? And some of that is like Cham Cham, and like having a little creature with you at all times who's your comfort creature and who also signifies that you're somewhere to stay. And then some of it is how people take care of each other. And so in this example, it was very clear. And also, like, I guess probably some of my head is just there because there's so much talk of baking during quarantine. I haven't been baking, but so many people have been. Claudia Gray did bake me a birthday cake this year, which was really
love it.
I know.
That's awesome.
So that's like stuff like that. Like, but that's a way to say that you love someone, that you care about them, that you be okay. So it started with just that one moment of just like Yoda just eating. And again, like also I think we're always trying to offset like a character just being an icon. And when you have someone like Yoda, who is known worldwide for his silhouette alone, right? That's a major character to have in the mix. So the more you can bring him down to earth and make him just feel like a regular human, even though he's not a human, I think the more kind of traction you can get out of that character. And that includes like just random little things like that he bakes, right? That we never knew about him. So it was that. And then it just became like, Buckets kind of took that on too. Buckets giving like offhand advice. That panel where he's giving advice to Cantam unsolicited. And Cantam's like, okay, cool. I think that actually happened because there was that panel, the way that Harvey drew it, it just had them kind of more in the foreground. It's the panel where the Padawans are all like hugging each other after going through an ordeal.
Right.
And it was like, we kind of needed them to be like talking. And I was like, well, all right, well, if you need some dialogue for them, they're definitely going to be talking about baking. That's all.
Yeah.
So it's just, everything just builds, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's not the first time too that we've seen Yoda cook, because we do see him cook a little bit in The Empire Strikes Back when he's cooking in the little hut. So I want to know your headcanon, have Yoda's cooking skills and even baking skills, have they kept on par throughout all those years in isolation? Has he found the proper ingredients to bake a cake every now and then?
It's like Dagobah probably has like a very mix of supplies when it comes to baking, right? Like I don't see many wheat fields on Dagobah, but there's not a lot of milk giving looking creatures, but who knows, right? So I'm sure he has to get very experimental.
Yeah.
That is probably the heart of creativity. So.
Yeah. Soil cakes, probably. Not very tasty.
Sounds miserable.
Mud. Wow. Yeah.
So I'd love to turn it over more to Race to Crashpoint Tower. And I want to start with Ram. He is just such a delight of a character, and he is this reluctant hero who isn't quite in the spotlight, but again has to step into that spotlight. He gets the call to adventure like any hero does, and this mantra that he has, it's you see the whole for the whole, and each part for the role it plays, not for what you want it to be or what you fear it to be, but just what it is. So, I'd love to know, obviously we're in just such a complex time, and we can really get overwhelmed during the pandemic. And I can say for Sarah and I, that's something that we have definitely resonated with, because there's just a lot going on. Sometimes you just have to like compartmentalize and look at each part on its own. So I'd love to know how you came up with this mantra, and what do you hope readers ultimately take away from Ram's wisdom?
It's that, I think it's that it's certainly something that I use. Like, it's definitely just very basically a prayer that I have, that I say, when I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'll say, may I see the world for what it is, and not for what I want it to be, and not for what I fear it to be. And I've found a lot of grace in that, because the temptation, of course, is to slide in either direction too far. And all that does is get us confused. And confusion is really like what got us here, right? And I think that's true on like a very personal level. I think it's true on a very historical level too. Like, we haven't in many ways truly faced some of the worst parts of our history. And that's also why we continue to repeat it and get ourselves in different mires like the ones we're in and we've been in for the past couple of years. So it's something I believe very deeply, is seeing things for what they really are. And I think as a writer, that's also my job. And so it has to be my prayer that I see it for what it is. And again, not for what I want it to be, and not for what I fear it to be. Fear, takes over the world when it's in you and it's all you see. And that's, to me, that's the lie behind fear. It's not that doesn't mean that bad things won't happen or that things aren't bad. It just means that that's not everything, but it feels like everything. And that's why prayers like that are necessary. That's why mantras like that, the prayer is really for clarity, and it's to be able to see clearly. And that's what we need to be, if we're going to step up into action, like Ram is called to do, like we're all called to do on some level, whether that means wearing a mask or staying in the house, getting vaccinated, like whatever that might be. Like, if you're called to action, like the only way to take action properly is to see clearly, and not to see through a lens of fear or a lens of overly optimistic hope, right? Like, if you're just out there like, well, everything's going to be fine, nothing bad is going to happen, you will die. And you will hurt other people. And that's a reality that we have to deal with. So it's about responsibility, and responsibility is a thing that I take very seriously as a writer, creating stories, because I believe, as I think all Star Wars fans could agree, actually, which is a rare thing, that stories are the most important power in the world. Like, stories change the world more than anything else. And if you really feel that, then you understand that we have to story responsibly. Otherwise, people will get very hurt. So that's what it's about for me.
Mm-hmm. I will say, for me, sometimes you can know those things in your heart and try and live those things every day and say that mantra without the words. But then you see something written on the page, and you just go, oh, yeah, like that's exactly what I needed. And truly, this was one of those moments while reading this book, especially right now when everything feels like a mountain.
Yes.
And so like I was very grateful for that, and being able to see myself in Ram and be like, okay, I'm just kind of do my own little thing in my garage, and be like, oh wait, I can't just stay in my garage. Like, I have to engage in order to move forward. But also I need to remember this mantra, and so that not everything looks like a mountain. And so very grateful for all that. Very good stuff.
I'm very happy to hear that hit home. And that the response I've gotten from young people has affirmed that too, which is really great. I think the other piece of that that's really important is Ram's journey from being like all these, parts that fit into the whole. It's really exciting when it's a project that you're into and you can hide away and deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a lot bigger deal when you're realizing that you are a part that fits into a big whole, and that the galaxy around you, the world, at war is a part that, is a whole that you're a part of, and you have to understand your own role in that and what that's going to mean. And that's a whole other conversation, right? And it's one that he doesn't want to have, but has to, because of who he is and where he is and what's going on around him. And I think that's something that's true of a lot of young people. They didn't ask to be born into a world that's falling apart, but the world is falling apart, and not asking to be born into it doesn't change the fact that it's falling apart. So now it's like, what are you going to do? How do you fit into this whole? What's your role in it? How are you going to change the world and survive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of the world that we live in, I think the last year has really, and many years even before that, honestly, but especially this last year, is this idea of, selflessness versus selfishness, right? Do you want to wear a mask or not wear a mask? And there's this interesting conversation that happens in this book, which I might be one of my favorite, if not my favorite, of the High Republic so far, which is between Lula and Vernestra, when they have this whole conversation about balance and emotion, or balancing your emotions and your attachment to things. And that's such a sticking point with the Jedi. And we are exploring that in the High Republic more so than the prequels did. Cause I think in the prequels, the Jedi are very straight edged, but Vern's ultimate lesson is if you're saving someone for them and not for yourself, that's not attachment. And I was like, whoa. Never thought of it phrased that way, and like it kind of all clicked. Like Sarah said, you have that moment where you see it written out, and you really form the thought. But I would love to know, what was it like to navigate this conversation, especially one that's always been at the heart of the Jedi Order, and to kind of flip it on its head a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a moment that's really special to me too, and I think of it as kind of part one in a series of moments that are upcoming, including one tomorrow, actually, in High Republic Adventure 7, that really gets into aspects of fear and similar conversations with Padawans and Masters and what that means, and then down the road even more. But that's a big part of this project is us being able to explore that and the complexities of that, and that there are no easy truths. Again, like the world not for what we want it to be, but what does that mean? And how does one love in a situation where we're not supposed to be attached? And it calls into question the very notion of love. In fact, like maybe love is not attachment. And maybe attachment is actually, very dangerous to the way that we love. But what it doesn't mean is don't love. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a misunderstanding to me, it's a bad interpretation of that, that idea that has really like persisted and I think kind of took root in the Jedi Order that we know from the prequels. The idea that you can sort of squash emotion, that you can actually just get away with just suppressing things. Like we know from this world that doesn't work, but people continue to try it anyway, right? So it's a way of like going there, like really asking those questions, like what does it mean, especially for a young person who's gonna have attachments and gonna have friends and gonna care about people, and then especially in wartime when those things are all going to be fraught and dangerous and fragile. How do you get through? And the idea of that conversation is not to necessarily have the answer, but to certainly like open up the question a lot wider than we're used to seeing it. And I will say, like Pablo, Hidalgo is one of the great thinkers. I think of him as a rabbi, in Lucasfilm and certainly around the Force and lore. And he's always really, really helpful with those conversations. So he really did help me kind of mold that into exactly what it needed to be. But mainly I was like, this is something Lula is going to be struggling with because she is ambitious. Mm-hmm. And that's a dangerous thing for a Jedi. And she knows that. She's also very self-aware. She's also deeply compassionate, and the ambition and the compassion don't get in the way of each other, which we think of as often the case, but they don't. That's not true for her. She is equal parts ambitious and compassionate. But that's also really hard when you care about people a lot and they're all in danger at the same time. So it's like, how do you focus? How do you stay true to being a Jedi and not being attached and also, go through all these.
Yeah, I would say it's so quintessentially Star Wars, though, is just, it goes back to George, which he always said, passion, too much passion is a dangerous thing sometimes. And again, just relating it to our own world. And I think Lula's ultimate takeaway is you have to balance those things and seek out the light no matter what and do the right thing. Right. So it's like, don't do it for yourself.
Right.
Do it because it helps other people and is the right thing to do. And that's just been so important, and continues to be important. Hopefully people can continue hammering that lesson into their minds, even outside of fiction,
Right. Yeah.
Speaking of doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, V18 and losing his voice. If there's one thing I love in a Star War, it's a silly droid. It really is. I think I love all of them.
Especially one that you can ride right on top of.
Then they become a mobile here. AZ from the Bad Batch has been a recent favorite because just the best. But V18. So what was the process of kind of deciding what he would look like and what role he would serve in the story?
Sure.
Because I love the very detail in the beginning of him that he's painted a different color so he's not seen as cargo. And I just think that's the sweetest.
Yeah. I just wanted him to be like a counterpoint to both Ram and the Bond breaks. And when you're creating the team, like everyone needs to kind of bounce off each other, right? And that's where this book started with sketches in my sketchbook of Ram floating, even though he doesn't actually float, but just sort of surrounded by parts, but mechanical parts, and his goggles, and the fact that he was greasy and all that stuff. It's very visual for me. And then the next sketch was the Bombrax and them just being these little furry creatures in jumpsuits with bat ears and just ridiculous. And then the next thing was V18 just being a big awkward boxy box, And so like the Bombrax, crotchety though they may be, they're very clear on who they are and what their role is, and they're very, very mischievous. And we see that more moving forward. They're just, they're difficult. But they're really good at what they do. They know exactly their role. They don't have like Ram's existential angst of like, what am I supposed to be doing in this world and whatever. They're just like, we're here to fix things and cause trouble. That's what we do. And Ram understands that with them. So they have an understanding. Like, they don't pry into his business, but they all hang out and fix things together. And V18 does not understand that and has no, social understanding of like people wanting to just do their own thing or like all these different like levels that are just not, reaching him for whatever reason. And he's also just a big box. So like what I wanted though was for V18 to really have an arc and to turn into something incredibly badass while still maintaining his awkwardness, which is also true of Ram. In a way, it mirrors Ram's journey, although they're awkward in very different ways. But I love the idea of V18 like getting really fed up with getting shot at, and just and then simultaneously like upgrading and being equipped with the ability to do something about it, and then letting loose with all his different new missiles and toys and everything. Yeah. And then I just also wanted like Ram to have a ride, like someone that he could ride. So that moment was so clutch to the whole story that that really had to happen in like the first chapter where he's like, I'm out of options. How do you feel about an upgrade? She's like, well, I guess the bomb racks are ready, right? They're like, we've waited our whole lives to get this droid some wings and a propulsor. Right.
I gotta say, like reading it on the page was one thing, but then seeing him in the free comic book day issue and getting to actually like the whole awkwardness, it's almost like that you have all the characters lined up walking towards the page. And you just have this like little box, that's V18 and he's just shooting missiles everywhere. And you finally get to put a visual to it. And I'm just like, wow, what an amazing character. He's so great.
And honestly, with a cover like this, like I was immediately like, yes, I don't know who he is yet, but he and I are friends.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. Another one of my favorite parts of this book are the Drengir. And Claudia in Into the Dark made me afraid of the Drengir. And I mean, I'm not afraid of them. However, they're really funny in this book. Like really funny. Wow meets with an audacious and ferocious desire to remain uneaten is probably one of my favorite lines in the whole book, next to I'm just the big ball of attachments. Who knew the Drengir were such comedians? And how do you balance them being both incredibly menacing and like an actual capital P problem alongside them being absolutely comedic kings and queens and, totally. Balancing kind of all of the characters in the book with them.
Yes. Some of that is because, to be honest with you, like I was very resistant and hesitant to write the Drengir. They weren't even initially in the finale of the book. That was kind of a later edition. And And the reason is because like Claudia and Cav are great writers who are dealing with the Drengir very, very smartly. And I was like, like not out of any like feeling less than, but just like they hit all the great beats with like evil plants. Like how much angry salad can one story take? Turns out a little bit more, but I had read everything, but I've also read all of everything that Cav is doing that we haven't necessarily seen yet. And there's only so much you can do with evil plants, I thought. But it was really reading. I think it was when I was reading Claudia's book, and I realized that they say meats because she has them saying meats. That wasn't me. That was hilarious. That was hilarious in her book. But the horror aspect of it is so forefront that I think you kind of like don't. That part of it just kind of like fades to the back. Yeah, to the back. You're trying not to get murdered by them, and they have like zombies out of your friends and everything else. So. But as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, the Drengir are funny. Like, the Drengir are hilarious. They say meats, like they call people meats. That's the funniest thing I've ever read. So then it was just like, well, I'll just lean into that. Like it was immediately clear to me that they were hysterical. The harder part was making them also scary. But to me, like the Nile are really the bad guys in this story. Like the Drengir are, if anything, like co-protagonists by the end because they're allies. Like that's Ram's stroke of genius is to make them into allies, and that plays out. Honestly, because I couldn't sustain them being scary and saying meats as well as Claudia could. Like that's her skill, and to me, they're just hysterical. So I just leaned into that. Yeah,
one of my favorite moments is when they all get in the vehicle that's attached to the Crashpoint Tower. And they all get it. I thought of like a bunch of like clowns getting in a clown car driving away real quick. And then of course I think of Poe Dameron when he's like, they fly now, It's
right.
like, okay.
Yes. That was I can't remember. I think in the first draft they just I really wanted I had to get them off planet at the end of it all. Otherwise they would have just been around and Cav would have had to deal with them in his book. So I needed them to leave, but I wasn't sure whether or not they could fly either. So in the first draft there's a passing Nile ship and they just like jump into it and like take him and the guy's like, where do you need to go? And they're like, yeah, like like you don't argue with Drengir in your ship. Like I will take you anywhere you need. It's like the taxi driver in like every 90s movie. It's like, say the word, like how fast, whatever. But then I think it was Pablo again, genius, who was like, I think they could probably fly, just not well. And I was like, I could do something with that, which is why they keep smashing into things on their way out. And everyone's like, wow, I didn't know the Drengir could fly. And someone's like, apparently not very well. Right? That's straight out of the editorial comment section from the actual book.
Yeah.
See, I recently introduced a young reader to the middle grade High Republic novels, and I was telling him all about the characters and just, the test of courage, and was like, this is the adventure they go on. It's so great. And like, I love that book, and I was so excited for that kid to pick up that book. At the same time, I was like, I can't wait until he finishes that book, loves it, and then gets to the Drengir in this book. Like I cannot wait for this kid to laugh out loud at these ridiculous Drengir. So I'm hoping that kid loves it just as much as I did, and so he will immediately hop into this.
I hope for a full report. Trust me, I was laughing while I wrote it. Obviously, I'm still laughing, and that's the example that I always go back to is Sweet Dreams Sweets. Sweet Dreams Sweet Seafood, which still cracks me up. Which like I guess like some people might find that arrogant. For me, it's like this is how I know it's funny. It's like if it makes me laugh. Like I don't know what else to tell you. That's the best barometer. I think I have a good sense of humor. So if I'm laughing, like I feel comfortable that it's actually going to be funny. And if I'm still laughing, like more power to me. I don't know what to tell y'all.
Exactly.
There are so many great aspects to this book to really start to round out the conversation here before we preview what's next for you. But you have Cantum Psi, which, by the way, the inclusion of a non-binary character is just so important and awesome to see in this book, especially for young readers, right?
Absolutely.
And you have the Hagskreath at the Republic Fair Zoo. You have Captain Idrak Snat, which might be the hardest I've ever laughed at a Star Wars book, by the way. And he's like, no, you're Idrak Snat. I'm Ram Jamaran. He's like,
I'm Ram Jamaran. Yeah, I'm a Padawan from the Starlight Temple.
So I would just love to know, were there any other parts of this book that you just like enjoyed so much and just have a lot of fun with it? Again, just going back to you being a 10-year-old writing Star Wars and just having whatever time you want with it. Like what really sticks out to you as one of your favorite moments outside of what we discussed?
Right. All those, I think I'd agree. Like the whole book is like 10-year-old me being like, wow, if I could just play in Star Wars, like what would I do? You know, because I don't know if I definitely had the action figures growing up, you know, and I played with them and like made up stories and like, this is that, you know what I mean? But I get to like also invent my own people and everything else. It was definitely the Idrak Snat conversation was a lot of fun. It pretty much wrote itself. It was just going to be hilarious no matter what to have a Padawan trying and failing miserably to mind control somebody and doing it out of sheer desperation. Like he doesn't have a choice. He's not just being a jerk. Like he needs to, and he's not good at it. It's really hard too, which I think is a good world building beat that we all kind of needed to know, which is that the Force is not easy to use, but Jedi make it look easy because we're so used to seeing these masters and knights running around, but Padawans are still learning and they struggle with it. So is that, but the other beat for me that was pure joy was the Sandvals and like having them in the midst of this like very epic and very modern, you know, space battle and city battle, to have this majestic dragon creature just like appear and to have it work in story because there is a zoo that they are, you know, escaped from. And then finally to like, I knew I wanted that was also something that was in one of the first drawings I did when I was kind of brainstorming about the book. I had them riding on a dragon creature and I didn't know how to fit it in there, but I told Cav, I was like, Cav, there needs to be a dragon in this story. I don't know how, but we got to figure it out. So let me know. And he's like, oh, great. You know, there's a zoo. So or whatever. I was like, perfect. Put it in there. And then we kind of like put our heads together. So but then also the beat where they're really going through it and they're running along the rooftops and they don't know what they're going to do next. And, you know, that moment where Ram is like crying because he looks at the city and it's like a mess. And then, which I had forgotten, I wrote, someone reminded me on Twitter, but Lula using her Padawan robe to like wipe his tear away. It's so like sweet. I'm very happy that I wrote it, but I just forgot. That moment then suddenly being followed up by this creature like landing, like Ty York landing with this creature on a rooftop,
Queen,
an absolute queen, and then being like, "Oh, what'd you bring us? Like, is that what you brought us?" And she's like, "No, I brought you the mother." Right? And then like that moment really happened naturally as I was writing it. I didn't know I was working up to that. I knew Ty was going to show up on a beast. I didn't know it was going to be the mother. Like that. I was just like, oh, you know, like writing it. I got really excited. And it was so like validating to be able to like, it actually worked in the story. And then it's Zine on top of her, right? It's like, which we almost missed that beat because it happens in the next chapter. And it's from Ram's point of view, who doesn't know who Zine is. He's like, there's a pink chick sitting on top of this like dragon. Cool. You know, I guess she seems nice. Lula likes her, so I guess we're cool, you know. So, but that was really a fun moment to write. And things do sneak up on you. And that was one of those things where I knew the Sandball was showing up. I knew Ty would be on it. I didn't know she was going to bring another one. It would be even bigger and it would be a bomb like that. And so writing it and be like, oh, I was really like, you know, it was fun.
It was so fun.
Yeah. Writing is fun, guys.
Writing is fun. Absolutely. It is hard work and it is very worth it.
But then you get those moments where you're like, okay, I guess I've set myself up to write this.
Yes.
Yeah. So to close out, before we talk about upcoming, which we'll do in like 2 seconds.
No
we
rush.
have 2 very quick rapid fire silly questions that we would love to ask you. The first, well, this one I guess is less silly, but this was asked by one of our patrons, Travis, who is lovely. What Star Wars character you most relate to?
Ooh, that's such a hard question. It's a great question. I really, Star Wars is so great because there's so many. Like I'm like running through the list of them all in my head, and it just depends. Like I really have moments of relating to all of the characters that are my OCs that I've written. Sardis Ramson just made his comic appearance. And he's my first Star Wars character, like for real. Like I wrote him in a short story from a certain point of view. And there's a lot in him that I gave to him of being a paramedic and hating bureaucracy and paperwork and loving dewbacks and monsters and stuff like that. And wanting to just ride out into the desert and never be heard from again. So him, you know, Lula and Zine both have elements of myself, certainly, as well as Farzala and Court. I don't have a good answer. Poe.
It's a tough one. Yeah.
Absolutely, Poe. Just because of the scarves, but, you know, another space poppy.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot. I really it depends on the day. You know, as a kid, I was a Luke kid for sure. You know, that's who I dressed up as for Halloween with those horrible plastic masks that you wrap around your head. And he was my dude. As I got older, I kind of started to identify more with Han. Now I just bounce back and forth all day. You know, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I wish I did. Sorry.
I mean, I definitely feel the same way. I'm like, okay, here's the scroll, and here's the reasons why for all of them. Yeah.
Exactly.
The other question we have, which Brad brilliantly came up with, I can't take credit for this one either, is which High Republic character do you think would have the most popular TikTok account?
Probably Court.
Court.
Yeah. Court is a legend. You know what I mean? Like if Court can, as we talked about earlier, like garner this much love without a word known word spoken, like what would he be able to do? What could he accomplish with just like a TikTok? Like Court's TikTok would be him running all over Starlight, like showing you stuff that's really cool, and then being like, whatever, you know? And you would be like, what does he say? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like it's Court, you know, like absolutely. And then running off and showing you other stuff. Like he's very curious and inquisitive, and he really enjoys like weird things happening. So he would just be like recording weird things happening all over Starlight, you know, whereas I think some of the others, no offense to them, but they would probably be a little more like you know, like this is like, it would just be like a video log of what's going on with them. And that would be really cool. You know, I would love for Lula to be able to like tell us all about the stuff that she's going through on TikTok. But I feel like Court would be the one who would really like show us a lot of different other things going on. And then like, again, respond to it at the end, like a little selfie.
I was just like, I immediately think of that one TikTok audio that went around was like, show us, like everybody has one cool thing in their house. And that thing is, you know, right. And then, you know, you show it and he'd be doing that for the Starlight. Just
definitely.
He'd be like,
yes. No,
our kitchens, like
right,
here's
exactly.
Yoda baking.
Meet this guy. And here's this guy over here. And then the last thing I'll say about Court is that we're learning more about him now, but this is really Farzala's story that we're in right now. But the next story that we're about to go into is Court's story, much more so. And the whole crew is there. And it's cool because it's after Crashpoint Tower. So it's the reunion kind of moment. And then we go off to Takodana, which is really exciting.
Oh,
and,
awesome.
Yes. And we learn a lot more about Court. And I'm really looking forward to people seeing that. Also, Tony Bruno has a totally different style from Harvey. And it's like very, very different. And it's beautiful in a totally different way. It's very like classic Disney, like old style kind of Disney vibe, which is super interesting. It's almost like a 1950s vibe, but he really does live in the characters and bring them to life, but in a totally different way. They're also notably like older now. And it's really cool to see, again, their growth, you know, who they are. So it's cool because we're going to meet them through Tony's eyes a lot for the next 3 months after this. And then back to Harvey, you know, as we close out the phase.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're talking about what's coming up next. So we'll close out here with what's on the docket for you. You have a Forlam and Zuckuss comic as part of War of the Bounty Hunters, which is exciting to see you follow up on from a certain point of view. And then also you have Trail of Shadows, which, you know, I want to ask you, are we entering it's a High Republic whodunit era? You know, it seems like you are really leading into that noir and the crime gangs and all that stuff that you talked about really loving and are interested in. So like, what can readers expect from the new genre within the High Republic that you're so passionate about?
No, it's exactly that. And that's why I was so excited to do this. I was just like, oh my God, this is all my favorite things in one place. Like, and to top it off, that it's a Marvel comic, you know what I mean? Like, that's so perfect. Such a great opportunity to really play. And what I'll say is that what's great about it too, is that it's extremely entwined with the larger narrative of the High Republic. So it's not like, oh, this like weird, wacky murder happened in the kitchen, you know, like, let's see what that is, which would be totally cool. I'm not dissing that. But what I'm saying is like, this is like crucial reading for the High Republic, like larger meta narrative. It specifically, you know, with things that happen in this wave. And so it really does touch on a lot of stuff, and then and obviously in the stuff to come. So that's what's so cool about it. Like, that's what's so cool about the whole initiative, right? Is that like Star Wars as a whole, we get to really jump around in different genres and be playful and unify it, you know, within this common narrative. So there's lots of new characters to meet, and as well as like it's very interconnected with everything else.
Yeah.
So cool.
Out of the Shadows gave us a very jaded view of the Republic, so I'm excited to see how that might continue with your comic. I feel like it's going to continue that a little bit. So
it's a dark comic, I will say that. And what's really fun is as a writer, getting to explore tonally, like the same world, very literally the same time period in the same world, but in the opposite sides of the spectrum. Between High Republic Adventures and Trail of Shadows. Like that's range, I say. So that's exciting. I'm enjoying that aspect of it.
Definitely. And we also recently learned that you'll be writing the next young adult novel for the end of phase 1, wave 3 of phase 1. Yes. Midnight Horizon, which, is not an evocative or an ominous title at all. Super normal. Everybody's going to be happy. Things are going to be great. We know you can't really say anything about this book for, a few more months. But the question I'll ask instead is, like, what has it been like to transition to writing for the young adult audience, moving up from the middle grade audience?
Super cool, obviously, in that it's like, it makes sense in the, I guess I'll go back to what I said earlier in that, like, it's basically once I understood what my assignment was for this phase of the High Republic, I was immediately like laying down the framework to build to something big. And what that something big is Midnight Horizon. And it's very much the culmination of all of my work in the High Republic up to this point, in multiple ways. And that's what I'm really excited about, is that as great as everything that I'm working on that I have out right now is, like, it's all leading towards this really gigantic story, which is Midnight Horizon, which is just culmination is the best word I can tell you. So there's a lot of different arrows leading to it, including things that are being seeded now that are going to pop up over the next couple months leading up to it too. So keep an eye out for all that. It's my favorite Star Wars book that I've ever written. I love it, in a very deep way, in part because it's all, there's so much I got to build towards it, so it does stand on its own, but I've done a lot of groundwork to get to the people who are in it to the place where they need to get and everything else. And so it's exciting to just build off of my work and then also to interconnect it, because I had a lot of fun. Cav and I had a great time building Race to Crashpoint Tower and Rise and Storm kind of together, but it was hard. And being able to do that with me and myself is a lot easier. Yeah, I like being able to do both, like I love the collaborative stuff. That's amazing. But once I realized, like, oh, I'm bouncing off myself in these certain moments, like that's easy, comparatively. It's actually really hard because there's different deadlines for different things, but it's a lot easier than being like, hey, like calling England, you know what I mean? Like, so the best of both worlds is like being able to do both, which also continues, throughout the initiative. So that's really cool. But yeah, there's just so much fun and darkness ahead.
Yeah, I think I speak for both of us, and we're both really excited and also very scared.
As you should be. I will also say that I've seen the cover, and I think it's my favorite cover in the High Republic.
Oh, awesome.
Cannot wait.
I've loved every one of them thus far, so that makes me all the more excited.
The interconnectivity gets me so excited. I will say, move over MCU. We got the DJOU now, because you're bringing in all the stories together to this final point. So I can say we're so excited for what's to come from you. But thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was such a pleasure. Where would you like our listeners to follow you online?
Yes. On Twitter, I'm at DJ Older. On Instagram, I'm at Daniel José 1. On TikTok, I'm at Daniel José Older, my full name. TikTok is the only one of those that is G-rated. Not that I'm stripping on my other ones, but just that there's a lot more cursing. I really make an effort to make TikTok safe for the kids in terms of the colorful language that I use. On Twitter, I make no such promises. My website is danieljoseolder.net. On there, you can find actually my blog from when I was a paramedic, which is also a lot of where I learned to write in different ways. Also, speaking of learning to write, I have classes posted online. There's a website called Knowable that does audio classes, and there's one called Skillshare, which does video classes, and they're about narrative fundamentals and writing techniques and stuff like that. So you can find all those on my website, as well as all of my books, of which I have many, like 15 or so. Yes. Yeah. So definitely go there and find books and read them. The next book besides Star Wars stuff that's coming out for me is called Ballad and Dagger, and it comes out next May. It's from Rick Riordan's imprint as part of Hyperion Books, which is also Disney. And it's a modern day urban fantasy with lots of gods and demons and Caribbean lore and Jewish lore and lots of other things. It's a really, really close to my heart project that I'm really excited about. So yeah, go find it, pre-order it.
We will be there.
That,
Awesome.
and I will also say a book, if listeners, if you're hunting for more Daniel José Older middle grade,
Yes.
Flood City,
Flood
it's
City.
on shelves right now
It is.
at
It is.
bookstores near you.
And it's very Star Warsy. So, get it, enjoy
Yes.
it. I wrote it like 10 years ago, actually, but because publishing is weird, it didn't come out till this year. And here we are.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thank you once again for joining us on the show. And until next time,
Pleasure.
may the force be with you.
For light and life.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to that interview with Daniel José Older. It was his first time here on Friends of the Force. Very exciting that we've gotten to chat with a couple of authors from the High Republic era, because everybody knows who listens to this podcast, this is our bread and butter. So to be able to pick his mind a little bit and understand what led him to write what he did, and also get inspired by what inspires him in Star Wars is just fascinating and so fun.
Also, he has a great social media presence. So we mentioned it at the end there, but if you're not following him on TikTok and Twitter, go and do that. Make a good choice.
Absolutely. And speaking of social media, you can follow Sarah and I on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads, and you can find the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure wherever you listen to subscribe to the show. That way every new episode drops right into your podcast feed wherever you listen. And if you have a couple extra minutes in your day and you really enjoyed this episode, please leave us a written review if you could, because it helps other people find the show and get excited about the High Republic along with us. So that's always a good time.
And we also have a Patreon where we are having even more conversations about Star Wars and the High Republic, including on our series, The Force Pull List, where we're talking about the High Republic Adventures comics as those release. And we are so, so grateful for our patrons. Amy, Anna, Brian, Cheryl, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Jesse, Jen, Knights of Ren, Huang, Levi, Lindsay, Lucy, Marie Claire, Neil, Rachel, Sarah, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Travis, and T. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. It truly means the world to us. And until next time, may the force be with you always.
Bye.